Alright, so it seems like we got a little bit of a civil war that is currently underway in conservative media circles, specifically centering around Steven Crowder going up against the Daily Wire, which has a pretty deep cast of some conservative commentators. They have Ben Shapiro, they have Candace Owens, they have Matt Walsh, they have Michael Knowles. I think they just recently added Jordan Peterson, so it's a pretty big task for Steven Crowder here to try to take them all head on, but it looks like that's exactly what he's trying to do right now. So to start us off here, basically a couple of days ago on January 16th, Steven Crowder comes out and he tweets something like pretty vague and ominous, and he says, "I'm done being quiet tomorrow." Okay, and so then the next day we get a follow-up where Steven Crowder is essentially accusing the Daily Wire of trying to exploit him or treat him as a wage slave, which is something he actually says, and we're going to get to that here in a second. But another thing that he was accusing them of is being in bed with big tech because of some of the specifics surrounding a potential contract that the Daily Wire was offering to Steven Crowder to join the cast that they already have. So hear from Will Summer kind of breaking down how this all went, and then we'll get to a couple different clips here from Steven Crowder. I have one from Candace Owens as well, who is basically calling Steven Crowder a bitch, and then we're going to get to one of the top dogs at the Daily Wire, Ben Shapiro, and his thoughts on all of this, and some other clips as well. But here to start us off from Will, he says, "There's a big feud breaking out tonight between two of the biggest names in right-wing media. It pits Steven Crowder against Ben Shapiro's Daily Wire all over a $50 million offer for Crowder that he found so offensive that he leaked the terms of the offer." Okay, so when he came out and he made his initial video, he wasn't actually openly mentioning the Daily Wire, but you could kind of tell based on the implications that most likely that's who he was talking about. There were only so many big, right-wing media outlets that could be offering him something like a $50 million contract or whatever. So he basically gives them like little, subtweets or shots at them across the bow without explicitly mentioning them. And then you had, the Daily Wire basically taking that situation and responding directly to Steven Crowder and putting out this whole video breaking down the terms of the contract and how they thought Steven Crowder was lying about the type of situation that was happening. And so you have all of this basically unfolding within just a couple of days. But I mean, just looking at this from a total perspective here, $50 million as an offer for Steven Crowder, and this was $50 million over 4 years, so like what, 12 and a half or so million dollars per year. I would almost bet my life that Steven Crowder is not bringing in $12.5 million per year. Okay, and he thought that this offer, even if he is hitting that, I mean, maybe he gets close to that, I guess, but even looking at this offer of $12.5 million a year, he thought that was laughable. He thought that was offensive. Okay, and he even brings out the term again, wage slavery, which is hilarious considering how conservatives like Steven Crowder and the folks at the Daily Wire typically talk about labor contracts and labor generally under a capitalist system. But suddenly when it's Steven Crowder personally being offered $50 million over 4 years, now he's being heavily exploited, even though that contradicts pretty much the entirety of his ideological framework, at least related to economics. But they continue here saying that yesterday Crowder, newly independent, okay, he just recently left The Blaze, and trying to build his own media company. Okay, so this is a pretty big part of this, right? I think part of the reason why Steven Crowder is trying to pick this fight with the Daily Wire in the first place is he's trying to put a sort of like rift in the ground between him and the Daily Wire people, because he's trying to be their competitor. Okay, so you're going to sort of see how that plays out throughout his commentary on all of this and some of the clips that we get to here. It very clearly looks like, in my opinion at least, that this was sort of a setup by Steven Crowder. He recorded a bunch of phone conversations with some of the top people at the Daily Wire and basically is trying to use this to, number one, gain clout for himself and potentially launch a competitor to the Daily Wire's outfit that they have right now. But so they continue saying he released the terms of the deal without naming the Daily Wire initially, and Crowder made this out to be a big whistleblower moment, urging his fans to fight, quote, Big Con and join his email list, of course. So, getting a little bit of grift in there, for the sake of it. But they say that Crowder focused on two parts of the offer: that he would lose money if he failed to deliver all of his contracted episodes, and that his money could be reduced if he was banned from YouTube or other platforms, and he left out that this was $50 million over 4 years. So again, sort of two different components here. Number one, he apparently thinks that he is worth more than $50 million over 4 years, and number two, that basically there was this clause within this proposed term sheet that the Daily Wire sent him that said, if you get taken off of YouTube, if you get banned and lose that ad revenue for us, we are going to take a cut of some of this money that we are promising you. Now, listen, you could maybe say, okay, well, that's not, according to conservative analysis of big tech and all of this stuff, right? You could say, as Steven Crowder has tried to claim, that like, oh, you're giving into the outlines of YouTube and their censorship and the way that they go about moderating their content. So I sort of see where a little bit Steven Crowder is coming from with that type of a critique. But I mean, again, at the end of the day, this is just, the Daily Wire doing capitalism. So the idea that he would look at this and say like, oh, you are going to, take a cut away from me if I bring you less revenue through my videos because I did blackface or said some racist shit or transphobic shit and got taken off of YouTube for a little bit. That's just like, I mean, it seems pretty basic. It seems like a pretty good trade-off actually for Steven Crowder, because I mean, again, keep in mind, if he's completely independent, if he doesn't have financial backers like the Daily Wire, and he gets banned off of YouTube, then you're losing out on 100% of that revenue, whereas with this contract, the Daily Wire would at least be absorbing some of the risk during that type of a situation. But again, Steven Crowder, I don't think is honestly looking to like have a serious back and forth and negotiate his way into the Daily Wire. I think he was just trying to get some sound bites in order to, play victim here for a little bit, which he loves to do, and to try to, again, to draw this sort of dividing line between him and the Daily Wire. But they continue saying that fans quickly figure out that Crowder is talking about the Daily Wire. So tonight, the Daily Wire CEO, Jeremy Boring, the right-wing mogul empire-building character, puts out his own hour-long video. So they're going back and forth with like video responses here. It's just fucking hilarious seeing these people fight like this. I mean, honestly, I had the sort of impression that they were a lot more in lockstep with each other, because at the end of the day, these were all just propagandists for corporate America, the billionaire class, the military-industrial complex, Christian nationalism, etc. So these are all people who are basically millionaires funded by billionaires, right? And so it's not like surprising that I guess they're having some sort of cracks here. But at the end of the day, honestly, I did previously think that they were a lot more cohesive than this, but looks like we're headed for something interesting here. They say, so this right-wing mogul empire-building character puts out his own hour-long video effectively calling Crowder a moron for misconstruing the offer, and the reaction among the right-wing fan base was initially with Crowder, but he says now it seems to be shifting against him with the revelation that he treated a $50 million contract like indentured servitude. Now, again, keep in mind, Steven Crowder has literally come out in the past, and I've seen people spreading around some of his, previous tweets from the last couple of years. Steven Crowder has previously come out and said that like, oh, Colin Kaepernick is complaining about a multi-million-dollar contract. Like, isn't he just a lazy piece of shit, right? You should just accept whatever is put on the table for you. That's a large amount of money. You should just be a good little cog in the machine, right? That's how he talks about it when it's other people, specifically mostly, black people, but any working class person, right? He's going to say, well, this is just how the labor market works, right? This is capitalism. This is the free market, etc. But then again, when it comes to himself, he's like, oh no, I'm actually a wage slave, right? Which is like a Marxist sort of leftist critique of, labor relations under a capitalist system. But, he would never apply the same exact language or the same exact standard to any other worker in the country except himself, apparently. But they say one final detail. Jordan Peterson, whose podcast is hosted by the Daily Wire, was apparently unaware of who Crowder's video was actually about and initially tweeted his support for him, and someone appears to have gotten through to him though, and Peterson then later deleted the tweet. I mean, again, this is honestly just fucking hilarious. But they say in his video, Steven Crowder insists that it is a slave contract and there is no need to be enslaved like this. And then the Daily Wire revealed that this slave contract was for $50 million over 4 years, 4 weeks off a year, and Steven Crowder never working on Fridays. Not a bad deal. Okay, so let's just go ahead and get into some of these clips here, right? So this is one of the first ones that he put out after giving that ominous tweet that we talked about.
Big tech is in bed with big con. The people you thought, the people I thought were fighting for you, a lot of it has been a big con. Now, I'm specifically avoiding naming names or going after individuals in this video because I genuinely hope that those I'm addressing, and you know who you are, have a change of heart. Don't sign these contracts. I know I now know what you are signing out there. I have the luxury of not having to. Let me go through this. If any of the major platforms issues a content strike such that Crowder cannot be monetized on such platform, the fee will be reduced by 25%. And then another 20% of it happens on Apple. And then another 10% of it happens on Facebook. And then another 10% of it happens on Spotify. And then if you get a strike, meaning a suspension, another 20%. Just to drive it home, you get hit by a car, you have a sick day, you could lose $100,000 a day. This is what's sent out to everybody.
Okay, so again, basically his point is like, oh, these Daily Wire people are actually in bed with big tech. And honestly, I think it's funny that like conservatives come out and have all of these critiques for big tech when it's like the core root of the problem with the power and influence of big tech is an inevitable outgrowth of the capitalist, so-called free market system that they incessantly support, right? And deregulating the government and all of these different things, or getting rid of government regulations and enforcement and all of that. And it's like the main core problem with big tech in this country is the monopolization of this industry, which is again an inevitable outgrowth of the capitalist system. Okay, so you should be having a critique there that isn't just like, oh, big tech is woke and so therefore they're bad, which is basically all that conservatives have to say about the matter. They don't care about the actual authoritarian power and dominance that large monopolistic corporations have over the United States and the American people. They just want their people. They just want conservatives to be the ones in the top of the hierarchy in that position within these various monopolized or within these various industries, right? They don't actually have a problem with the hierarchy or the system or the structure itself. They just have a problem with who is at the top of those structures right now, and the fact that like he can't go and do a bunch of blackface on his YouTube channel without getting potentially demonetized or banned, right? So I mean, his critique there is like, I kind of get it if you're just completely giving in to the narrative that conservatives use when they're talking about big tech. I sort of get that, and I could see how this would play well, at least a little bit, with a conservative audience where you're like, oh, well, the Daily Wire wants me to basically be punished because of, woke liberals at YouTube or Apple or whatever, social media you're talking about, pushing to censor me or something like that. So I sort of get where he's coming from a little bit with that conservative analysis. But I mean, again, at the end of the day, this is completely empty. And Steven Crowder has been, as they're going to point out here with one of these clips that was put out by the Daily Wire people, this is a guy who has been working for big tech basically throughout his entire career. And same with, other people like, the Daily Wire people as well. I mean, they're all, regardless of whether or not it's like big tech, quote unquote, given their own definition, it's like you guys work for billionaires, you work for corporate backers, right? Okay, so you're not like actually true independent media. And I guess it just so happens to be a coincidence that all you do every day is do agitated propaganda on behalf of corporate America, the people who are financially backing you. But, call me a conspiracy theorist, I guess, on that one. But now we get to this second clip here from Crowder. This is a short one, just 22 seconds, and he basically breaks out this recorder, which this is part of what gave me the indication that this was, planned previously by Steven Crowder, is because like, why were you recording these phone calls with these people in the first place if you didn't plan on doing some sort of video like this to try to like expose them and, start this little civil war that he has? But let's just go ahead and watch this real quick.
They don't get deals that...
They can be wage slaves for a little bit, come over and make a salary and grow their brand. They can be wage slaves for a little bit. They can be wage slaves for a little bit.
Okay, so basically the context surrounding that is you have, I guess that's the CEO, this guy Jeremy at the Daily Wire, who's telling him on this phone call with Steven Crowder that he recorded for some reason, right? And Jeremy is basically saying like, oh, when we have younger people who are sort of up-and-comers within right-wing political propaganda, circles, when we have them come in, then we're going to make them be little wage slaves for a little bit as they work their way up, and then eventually, they'll go off and do their own thing, or maybe they get promoted or something like that, right? So the Daily Wire CEO that he's on the phone with there is the one who's using the term wage slavery initially, which is probably partially why Steven Crowder ended up using that himself. But again, it's just honestly fucking hilarious because this is literally a leftist critique of a labor market and labor relations under a capitalist system. Okay, so the fact that you have somebody who is as hyper-capitalist of a ghoul as you could possibly ask for in Steven Crowder coming out and using this term as if it, solely applies to this situation, right? As if like Daily Wire employees are the only wage slaves in the country and everyone everybody else is just part of this magical free market. It's just wild to see, right? I mean, he's just pulling this out of his ass to cherry pick and use it only in a situation that just so happens to financially implicate himself. But again, the real underlying critique there of labor relations under capital is that, or under capitalism, is that you have, this inherent coercive mechanism with capitalism that, sure, you could technically, in some cases, just up and leave a job that you have and try to go get another one, but there are obvious structural barriers to that when we don't have, widespread public housing or socialized housing in this country, when often your healthcare is tied to your employment. So leaving your job could potentially mean you lose your healthcare for yourself and your family. You could lose housing. You could, lose the ability to provide stable food for yourself and your family, right? There are all of these different inherent underlying threats that are baked in as a part and as a function of the capitalist system to try to force workers at the bottom rung of the ladder to have to accept jobs with shitty pay, shitty benefits, shitty, working conditions, etc. So that's the actual structural critique and why many leftists use the term wage slavery in that way. But of course, Steven Crowder would have absolutely, nothing to say about that in any other situation whatsoever. But moving on, now we have Candace Owens getting pretty heated here in her critique of Steven Crowder as this was all unfolding, okay, and even goes so far as to call him a little bitch boy. Okay, so let's jump into this one real quick.
Wanted to pay Steven. Nothing happened here other than nobody wanted to pay Steven Crowder $120 million. So he
Okay, we gotta pause on that. Steven Crowder, apparently, at least according to Candace Owens here, thought that he was worth $120 million over that same 4-year period, okay? $30 million per year, okay? You could literally add up every single left-wing political commentator on YouTube and add up the amount of money that we all make, and I guarantee you it would not reach $30 million, okay? This is just a good perspective here in terms of how much funding, how much money these conservative right-wing pundits and propagandists actually bring in, as they are constantly complaining about how, all of these, big corporate communist entities are trying to drown right-wing media and they're propping up left-wing media and all of these socialists or whatever the fuck. It's complete nonsense, okay? This is where the financial backing is coming from, or this is where the financial backing is going to from corporate America. And, you're talking about millions and millions and millions of dollars that are brought in on an annual basis, to the point where Steven Crowder would, I guess, in some hypothetical world, think that he is worth $30 million a year. I mean, just sit on that for a second. That is an unfathomable amount of money to think that you are capable of bringing in, but that's what he was demanding, and it looks like that's where part of this split was occurring.
Turn to his viewers, who he thinks are stupid enough at least not to understand how business negotiations work, right? This is normal, you kick it back and forth, and they were going to make up for his loss. So people that are upset by his video, the millions of people who watched it, are now going to give him $1, whatever it costs to be in the mug club, and they're going to become the $120 million that he feels that he deserves. First of all, we're going to say this: unrelatable. Unrelatable. People are trying to pay for bacon and eggs right now at the grocery store, trying to buy a steak once a week, and you're over here crying because somebody couldn't meet you at $120 million. And it is crying. I don't like it. It was a total bitch move. There are plenty of things that happen across all organizations in the conservative movement where I will say that I empathize with Steven Crowder, and saying that sometimes you feel like a cynic, which is is everybody selling out? Are people doing this, people doing that? There are a lot of things that Daily Wire has done that I disagree with. There's a lot of things that Turning Point has done that I disagree with. There are things perhaps that PragerU has done that I disagree with. I have worked with all of these companies, right? But to do a total bitch move and go out to the public rather than trying to resolve these things and these slight differences behind the scenes, and to make it seem like you're the hero and you're the true one and you keep it authentic when really nothing happened other than you didn't like an initial term sheet, and all you had to do was tell them that and tell them what you didn't like and go back and forth with lawyers like everybody else. I think it's crappy. I think Steven is a little egocentric. He probably will do better on his own. I don't think he knows how to plan a team. And by the way,
Okay, so I'm just going to cut it off there. Listen, I mean, a couple different things, right? At the beginning, I thought it was funny that she's talking about how, this is totally unrelatable because so many people are dealing with inflation and they're having to buy these basic necessities, and he's coming out here and, talking about how $50 million is offensive and how it's, he's worth much more than that, right? I mean, that part of it was kind of funny because none of them are actually, relatable, at least not in my opinion. I mean, again, these are all millionaires who do propaganda on behalf of billionaires and corporate America, so, I mean, that part of it is, honestly, again, just laughable coming from these people. But then she goes on to talk about how you're a little bitch boy because, you took all of this shit public. You should have been handling it behind the scenes. I kind of get that critique there because, again, it looks like very clearly this was a setup by Steven Crowder when he was recording those phone conversations, and he knew that he wanted to draw this dividing line in the sand, even though in his first initial video he's like, oh, I'm not naming any names or anything, but then it blows up into this entire thing and everybody immediately figures it out. So I do think it's kind of a fair critique there to say that Steven Crowder is doing this disingenuously. Of course he wants to have everybody sign up for his mug club. Of course he wants to potentially start his own media empire to compete with the Daily Wire. All of that may be true, but at the end of the day, I mean, her core critique there was basically that, like, Steven Crowder is somehow different from the rest of them in their authenticity or something like that, right? None of them are authentic, okay? These are all, again, people who are essentially being paid to be stooges for the elites that they constantly pretend to rail against. I mean, that's what the Daily Wire is. That is what Steven Crowder is as well. But I'm going to finish off here just reading this quick little take here for Ben Shapiro on how he thinks this is all going down, right? And keep in mind, I mean, this is not something that's going to end in the foreseeable future. I mean, this is probably going to be dragged on and on and on because Steven Crowder does apparently want to actually start his own sort of Daily Wire enterprise. So this is just going to keep heating up from here. But this is a take from Ben Shapiro himself. He says, "It's nasty to attack my company and the Daily Wire hosts as Big Con by lying about the meaning of a non-binding term sheet. It's despicable to plan weeks in advance to attack my best friend and your friend by setting up and secretly taping a phone call, all to grow your email list. Here is the timeline. Prior to October 5th, Steven's agent requests we send an offer. October 5th, we submit a non-binding term sheet. November 2nd, Steven tells Jeremy, the CEO guy, he wants $30 million per year and us to send him a new offer, refusing to redline the term sheet. November 14th, we told Steven we won't do that. December 12th, Steven apparently registers stopbigcon.com, knowing he's leaving the Blaze and that we haven't provided him an offer to his liking. Steven needed a plan, and attacking us was the plan. And honestly, I think that part of it is 100% true. Again, he was doing this, weeks ago, right? Got this whole website, Stop Big Con, right? So he had this in the works. He was planning this. He says, December 15th, Steven announces he's leaving the Blaze. January 7th, Steven texts Jeremy in friendly fashion to ask if they can talk. January 9th, Steven calls Jeremy and secretly takes him. So this is like almost a month after he initially got this Stop Big Con website. He says this means 96 days elapsed between when he received the term sheet and when he secretly taped Jeremy, and it means 36 days elapsed between when he decided to attack the Daily Wire and Jeremy by purchasing Stop Big Con and when he called Jeremy to tape him. Once more, if you actually care about the supposedly horrific, non-binding first offer term sheet offering $50 million over 4 years, Jeremy reads it line by line, and they literally dropped like an hour-long video going through this entire contract to break it down. But I'm just going to leave you guys off with this clip, which I think perfectly is posted here by the David Dole. Basically just summarizes how conservative media works, where everybody is trying to pretend like they're the outsider, they're the populist, they're the anti-elitist, the anti-globalist, and all of that shit, while actually literally just working for the same billionaires and corporations who they are doing propaganda on behalf of.
Don't enjoy the same luxuries that we do of being independent.
Steven, the whole time I've known him, has worked for someone else. He was paid by PJTV when I met him, which was owned by a billionaire at the time. Then he was paid by CRTV for a number of years, which was owned by a billionaire at the time. Then he was paid by The Blaze, which was subsidized by a billionaire. And he didn't necessarily have to be profitable. And he doesn't know for a fact that he was profitable because, as he has said very publicly, all those companies, none of them really shared all the information about what was happening with them. So Steven feels very certain that his show was always profitable, but he doesn't know that his show was profitable.
Everyone is saying good Politic guy has the best Politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying